Hi, I'm Jason with MDI, and I wanted to give a big shout out to Creative House Studios for letting us use their soundstage for this review. Now, today we're going to be reviewing the Silencer. Last time we reviewed the Silencer Lite. Today we're going to be reviewing the Silencer Pro, as well as the gimbal kit that we received. Now, right off the bat, the Silencer Pro comes with this unique base plate. Now, the Silencer Lite version did not. It came with a small little attachment that held the rods together. But this one, the rod placements are already attached to the base plate. And what happens is you can basically put the motor into either side, and this allows for a much more solid hold because you're going to need a tension pulley. It comes with a tension pulley so that you don't have to switch rubber bands all the time. What happens is you can place the, whatever size rubber band, probably the largest one, the 170, and then you can use this to adjust how much tension you want by putting the rubber band on the other side. Now, the Silencer Pro still comes with a long version. Now, the gimbal version, as you see over here, is significantly shorter, much shorter than the original motor. The reason for this is you don't necessarily want to have all that weight. So they supply you with a much shorter rod. Now, as you know, we shoot with the Panasonic GH4 here. Now, the Silencer Pro comes with a hot shoe mount for the rods that you can place, as you see up here. However, that version only works with Canon DSLRs. You're going to need to get an additional Panasonic version that's available on the website. Now, as you can see, we've got it set up so that we have the rods coming out here and then the gimbal motor shooting out on this, this little adapter here. The reason we're doing it this way is because this allows us to adjust the tension on the fly. Now, we're going to test out the Silencer in a couple different configurations today. First one's going to be on the Moldwa gimbal, then we're going to try it out on the shoulder rig, and then we're going to try it out on a tripod, just to see how they perform in different configurations. Here are the tests. As you can see, for this setup, I have the Atlas dual rod support system, and what we're going to do is I'm going to follow my assistant Joe, and I am going to see how well I can rack focus with the Silencer. Gimbal coming. So that was a quick test of the Silencer with the gimbal. Now, as you noticed, at certain points you could see me hunting for the focus, and that is just because generally you're going to want to stay at the exact same distance from your subject, especially if you're following him. Now, if you're doing some more cinematic movements, you're probably going to want to do a little bit more practice, that way you don't overshoot your subject. That being said, the trigger could go under a slight upgrade, I think. Maybe not necessarily the trigger, but maybe something inside the control box. So I would love to see the Silencer have a consistent speed. So if I'm going to press it, no matter how hard I press the trigger, it's always going to move at the same speed. And the reason I say this is because it's very easy for you to overshoot. If you press too hard and if you overshoot, you try to go back and then you might overshoot backwards and then you keep focusing back and forth and not actually hitting your subject. So I think if there was an option to adjust at a constant speed, I think most people will hit their focus more accurately. Now that being said, this kit in all is probably one of the few options out there that I know of that allows the gimbal operator to actually rack focus, because chances are you're probably going to need a second person with some kind of other wireless follow focus, and that just becomes a bother, especially because you would need some additional accessories for your focus puller, like a wireless monitor and stuff like that. So that being said, this being an entire kit on its own is still probably one of the better options for you to be able to do all the focusing as a gimbal operator. Now, one thing you want to consider, most people don't capture audio straight from the camera on the gimbal, but if for some reason you do, just know that the motor could probably make some noise while you're recording. Now, if you're just doing some regular focus pulls like I'm doing right now, you might not hear it as much, but if you're going to be doing extreme pulls, the camera will definitely capture a much louder sound. Okay, now we're going to try the silencer on a shoulder rig configuration. We have the battery pack put back here so that it's kind of like a counterweight, and then we have the trigger over here on the left side. Now, quick tip, it actually is a little bit easier if you have the trigger on the left side as opposed to your right. Not really sure why. The left one seems to have a little bit better motor skills for this. So without further ado, check out this test footage.
Oh my God.
As you see, it didn't actually do too bad, and I was able to keep the subject in focus most of the time. And I think there's a couple reasons why. Number one, my head is a lot closer to the monitor in this setup, therefore I can actually see whether I'm in critical focus or not. And number two, because my head is so close to the GH4 and the motor, I can actually hear the motor a little bit when I'm operating the trigger, therefore making sure that I don't overpress the trigger and then thus overshooting my focus point. Now obviously the footage was not as steady as the gimbal, but in terms of overall usage, I think the shoulder rig option is probably better in terms of being able to capture focus from one point to the other. Okay, so now we're going to test the silencer if it was on a tripod. So sometimes maybe you don't have a follow focus ready, or you just don't want to touch the lens at all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try my best to rack focus between the silencer bag, the CAME-TV follow focus, the AB follow focus, and then the focus shifter all the way on the back. All right, so here is me. Yep, it's recording. Okay. All right, so here we go. Overshot the CAME, trying to go back a little bit. Overshot the focus shifter, trying to draw back. Okay, as you see in the beginning, I kept overshooting the focus. Takes a little practice, but here's the one thing that I was talking about with the gimbal. Chances are you're never going to be rack focusing on the extremes. So again, I would love to see some type of option where we will be able to trigger the racking speed so that it stays constant. And for something like this, I would love that if I pulled the trigger all the way down, that it's going to rack at a very slow pace. That way I won't miss my focus like I just did. All right, so now that we finished all the tests of different setups the silencer can be used, I've brought on a couple different follow focusing tools. I'm just going to kind of go over each one. Each one has its pros and cons and uses. And without further ado, let's start with one on the furthest right. This is the focus shifter. This is by far the cheapest one out of the bunch, coming in at about between $40 to $50. And what it does is there's a little lever that attaches to your lens where the focusing ring is. Then it comes with a little disc where you can kind of see your marks depending on where you're focusing. Now this thing is really great if you do a lot of shots, let's say on a tripod, just locked down. Maybe you're just tilting or panning to a subject. Maybe if you're using a slider possibly. And the reason being that I would only use it on that is because you're pretty much locked down and you just have to pull or push the lever. Now if you're on a shoulder rig setup, as you noticed, I had the monitor sitting right here in front of my face. And when it's that close, you're probably not going to be able to reach for the lever and or see the points where you have to hit. So that might be a thing to think about. The second one is a traditional follow focus that we're most familiar with. This one is made by Came TV and it mounts onto two rods on the bottom. Now this thing is great. Comes in at about $250 or so, and these things can be as cheap as $100 or as expensive as $500, and it all varies depending on features and build quality. But the great thing about this one here is it has something called hard stops or AB stops. What happens is we have a solid little block here, and then we have two other blocks that can move. So let's say you're on a tripod system, and you're racking focus from one subject to an item or vice versa. You can get yourself to focus on one subject, move the little stop right up to the block, then focus to the next subject, move that stop over there, and now you've limited the range of twist on the follow focus, and that way you can hit those focus points each and every time accurately without having to guess. When you're on a shoulder rig, same thing, you can do that, and because you're using your hands, it has a little bit more finite movement, which allows you to hit focus more accurately. But to do that, you want to make sure you have a lens that has a nice long focus throw. Now we come to the silencer. The silencer is by far the most versatile. You can adapt it to just a locked off shot. You can adapt it to a shoulder rig setting. And then most importantly, you can adapt it to your gimbal configuration. And that's probably the biggest one. The other two is you can't do a whole lot on a gimbal, but with the silencer you can. You can run around with the gimbal and you can still pull focus if you find yourself out of focus. That being said, it does fairly well. The only thing that I would say is that once you go past your focus point that you were trying to hit, it can be a little finicky to go back. And the reason being is the motors don't necessarily engage right away when you push down. And the other thing is that the control box operates on a velocity. So the harder I pull down, the faster it's going to rack. Now, the only improvement I could possibly think of is maybe there would be a switch in the control box, or maybe there's a little switch that you could hit on the trigger, and that thing is going to cut off what the maximum focusing speed is. I think if there's a way we can do this, if I push all the way down and it just kind of creeps along, I think that's great, because when you're focusing in a narrative work, very rarely are you jumping between two subjects very, very quickly. Usually you're following somebody and you're kind of easing your way into it. So I think if there was just some way we could, if there's some way they could add that feature into the control box, I think this would be a like a complete knockout hit with a lot of people. I mean, that being said, it's not a bad product. And I would highly recommend it if you are a gimbal shooter mainly. If you're on a shoulder rig a lot of times, I would say this is probably going to be your best friend. If you shoot on a tripod a lot, I would say this would be just fine. It'd be the cheapest option, especially if you're on a budget, or you can go with this one as well. If you have any comments or questions, just leave them down below, and we look forward to hearing what your thoughts.